I first met Stuart and Todd back in Shawshank when they were battling all kinds of trouble, long before they battled with bits of rubber. Listen now to a tale of another kind of life on the inside, and then get busy making.
I think we'll start with, this episode is a very cool one. It's been a while since we recorded it, but we've been busy and just having
coming up on a year.
Getting up. Yeah, almost.
It'll be a year next month.
Holy cow.
Happy October 1st, by the way.
Thank you. Yeah. The nice Halloween season is upon us.
You got a fire going in the house?
Well, it's funny you should say that. Our fireplace got condemned.
What?
Well, what happened is, we, as you know, we have an open fire, but it was already fitted when we bought the house. So we didn't put this in. So it's been in there probably about 30 years. But we came to get the chimneys swept because, as you have no doubt aware, the cost of fuel is going crazy, and this whole business in Russia and everything. And the cost of gas particularly is very expensive. So we're like, well, we have a fireplace and it does a good job of heating up the house, as you know.
Yeah.
So, I ordered a shit ton of logs to come in. And I thought, oh, cool. We can offset, some of the heat that we'd need with gas by using this fireplace. So we thought it would be sensible to get it swept prior to doing so.
Right.
And so we had a chimney guy come around, and he basically took one look at it and said, yeah, I've got to put the sticker on it. We this needs fixing up because it's unstable. And it's like, given that the house is a lot of it's made of wood, I thought that was a sensible thing to follow.
Sure. What's that going to set you back?
About 750 quid to replace.
Motherfucker.
I know.
The joys of home ownership.
So that's going to happen hopefully next week, and then we'll be able to have the fire back again. But so that's kind of curtailed some of my spending really. Stuff like that just comes along and smacks you in the tits. So
well, at least you've got the wood ready to go when the fireplace is fixed.
There we go. So, but hopefully, I mean, it won't pay for itself, I don't think, anytime soon. But we can't use it at the moment, so we shall have a nice, clean, ready to go fireplace. Hopefully soon, that'll keep the house warm. Anyway, aside from fires, I think I may have sent you a screenshot about this. It was on the 911, and it was about nostril holes on pieces. And I guess we could expand this into apertures generally on the face. Yeah. But the post was by Robert, and he said, nostril holes, no matter how well your appliance was sculpted, if you don't provide holes for your actor to breathe properly, I call it lazy and a bad design choice. It's horrible if you can't breathe through your nostrils. I've even seen appliances, a lot of makeup schools do that, with that cover the nose, the eyes, and the ears. And it's an interesting point, and I just thought it would be something to chat about briefly before we go into our episode interview, which is
well, I personally, I think it is you're pushing the boundaries of safety when you are blocking orify that we need for various things, whether it's eating.
Can I just congratulate you on using the word orify in a sentence?
Thank you. I think I used it correctly. I'm not sure. Orifices, but covering the mouth. If you got a face that has no eyes, has no mouth, God forbid your actor should suddenly start choking on saliva and their mouth is blocked. So, I think having ready access to the nose and the mouth is important and needs to be a design consideration.
I think that's the point. I think it is about the consideration is the big part of this, because obviously there are designs, we've all seen them and we've all done them, where some of the face is obscured, as in part of the mouth, or we covered an ear or both ears, or the eyes even. I've done makeups that I've covered both eyes.
It's akin to blocking, putting prosthetics that completely block front and back crotchal areas.
Yeah.
Because if your actor has to hit the head, you don't want to have to get them completely out of prosthetics and reapply every time they have to take a leak. It's a nautical term.
Very nautical.
You've been a nautical boy. Yes, you have.
So I think if you are covering things, you just need to check that the person is aware that that's going to happen, because this is the thing, you can sculpt these things without, you know, the person being around, and then just sort of stick it on, and at that point then you find out that they can't quite function right. But I think,
Yeah.
you know, if you've got marks to hit, or you're supposed to see, you know, partially obscuring the eyes, I mean, I'm not saying you can't do it, it's just it needs to be a consideration, and it needs to be done in consultation with the
Because
wearer.
claustrophobia is very real for some people.
Yes. And I'm guessing you would probably discover this. This is what's good about live casting, is you find this shit out pretty early on. But even if you had a successful live cast, or you scan them, that at the point at which you obscure part of their faculties, I mean, covering the ears and the eyes is often something that robs people of, you know, two senses, and they can't deal with that suddenly. You know, to have that taken away suddenly can be a problem, and it can affect their performance. And I remember did something on a TV show called Cows, which was written by Eddie Izzard, and it had a bunch of actors in it, and it was something I did years ago when I first started at the BBC, with Barry Gower. Barry Gower and I were both on it, and the makeups were huge. I mean, they came out, they were like, you know, sort of muzzles that you get on livestock, you know,
Yeah.
face, and it kind of did that thing where it kind of gets in the way of the mouth, because the piece sort of came 3-4 inches out from the lips, so you sound like this, and that's
It changes your speaking pattern. Yeah.
It changes your speaking pattern, because it sounds like you're wearing something. So even though it's not in that case difficult, or it's not that it's dangerous, but it has an effect, which as the maker you should make people aware of before you go ahead and do it, because if they record the sound and they're like, well, now we've got to do ADR and we weren't expecting to do it, then it's a problem. But so I think, you know, being aware of these things, you just flag up what the limitations are and see if people are okay about it. Because you could cover their eye with, they could cover one eye with their hand, or their ears, or with ear defenders or something, to practice going through the lines to see if it's something that would be an issue for them, because they may not know until they're in the makeup that, oh shit, I need both eyes, I can't have one eye covered or something. So but the breathing thing is an interesting one, because obviously you've got to be able to breathe right. And I'm sure you've worked with singers. I mean, some of those can be very precious about what it is that affects the sound of their voice, especially if they're doing it live. Then they can't just redo it. So they can't.
Yeah. And if you have to speak and breathe just with your mouth, that becomes something you've got to practice at. And it's also, if you block your sinus, that's also going to change your vocal tonality.
Yeah. So all of these things, they need to be considered and done in consultation, really, with the wearer. And I think it's quite a thing, I think, in a lot of makeup schools, because they're trying to constantly maybe outdo each other's not the right way of looking at it, but they're often, you know, pushed to kind of come up with more and more outrageous or, you know, adventurous designs. And in so doing, they may just ride roughshod over a very compliant model, which is great that they would do that, but that doesn't necessarily prepare you for a pissy actor who maybe getting paid a lot of money and is not going to be inconvenienced in this way.
Right.
And aside from the breathing thing as well, I would say things like pieces that finish too close to eyelashes and eyelids, you know, aside from affecting the ability of the eyes to open and close properly, I've had people that just their eyes water because the thing is near their eyelashes and they're not used to it, or, you know, they don't like it on their lips, but they keep, you know, kind of gnawing at it like they've got a piece of pie stuck in the corner of their mouth or something. It's like, you know, they're damaged, and it could be something that you hadn't anticipated would be a problem.
Yeah, it's something that in the design process and the sculpting process, you have to remember that someone is going to be wearing what you're creating, and they have to be comfortable doing so. It's, you know, it's never about the makeup. It's always about the performance.
Yeah. And I guess like Rick Baker, didn't he always used to wear the makeup that he was going to?
Yeah, he would try it off, try it first.
So he gets to know exactly what it feels like from, you know, the performance point of view, which is a decent thing to do. And I also think it's in a dwindling capacity to let people do that. I think makeup tests are invaluable for this kind of reason, where you can find these things out before the day and have time. Is that a little Gracie?
It is. Can you see her over there?
Yeah. Hello. She going to speak?
Yeah, she's, what do you got all over my desk?
The little kitty cat in the corner.
What the hell is all of
this? I saw the tip of an ear coming into the front. Yeah, I think, you know, doing a makeup test is great, but also working into, you know, when you agree to do some work, if it's something quite complicated that does cover lips or partially cover things, then you build into that, look, you know, we're going to do a makeup test and find out, but we may need on the basis of that test, we may need to redo the lips or something, in which case we need to build in time. Like, don't put the makeup test the day before the shoot, because if you find out that, oh, we need another week to fix this, you haven't got a week. But
oh, the luxury of a
anticipate it.
makeup test.
Yeah, but if you can anticipate that, you can build that into your opening gambit and say, this is why it takes this long, because we may have to redo stuff. It all depends on the budget and how good they want the makeup to be. But they need to be considerations at least, and not just breathing. But that's a good one. I mean, just assuming your actor will breathe through their mouth. Not everybody can do that. I found scuba diving can be quite uncomfortable when you're breathing through your mouth because, well, especially with a scuba tank, the air is very dry, and it just, after a while, it just becomes quite uncomfortable to synchronize. Your being underwater is different, but
the back of your throat gets dry and it becomes difficult to swallow. And
exactly. So if you're delivering
things can cascade from there.
Yeah, well, you got like a very emotional, monologue to deliver or something, and you've rather thoughtlessly blocked the nostrils, then it could just mess with their breathing pattern and everything. So, and I have done things like these nostrils for the the cow makeups and stuff, and it's something I've done a fair bit with ears as well. Is you find the nostril of the creature makeup, which might be 6 inches in front of the real nose, and then you find where the real nostril is, and you sort of engineer a pathway with tubing inside the piece so that there is actually air is able to get to the nostrils and sound can get to the ears.
Right. What I've done in the past, when I've had to do animal characters for children's theater productions, where you're basically creating a mouse muzzle or a dog muzzle, I will just leave the area up inside the mouth between the upper lip and the nose, just leave it open, so that the nose is open.
Gotcha.
To the air, and then they can breathe through their mouth and their nose. But you can't see it because the prosthetic is covering the opening. That's
a good idea. Yeah, I think especially for theatre, like you say, where people are delivering lines there and then, and there isn't going to be any additional dialogue recorded afterwards.
Yeah, same with teeth.
Yes,
if you're doing teeth for theater, you have to make sure that they're done in such a way that it's not going to affect how the actor speaks, giving them a lisp, which is what many teeth will do. Because you can't do ADR for theater.
No. And do you remember when we spoke to Chris Lyons, he was, he talked about that a lot with the teeth, like, doing Rami Malek's teeth for, the Freddie Mercury look, and he's got to sing iconic things. And I don't know if that's his voice we're hearing there on the stage, but it's, it's a real consideration how much it's going to interfere with the speech. And all of that comes into it. And I guess, it's just a case of testing things and making people aware.
Oh, and actors have to, when you've got a live audience, the adrenaline is really high. I've had actors bite through the bridges that I've made for them, that where it's basically, fangs that I'm not really doing gums. I've got something up in the roof of the mouth, very thin. And because of the adrenaline in the moments when they're on stage, they just close their mouth too hard and everything snaps.
And then you got
thankfully, nobody's broken their own teeth, but they've broken the appliances that have had to be recast.
Yeah. So one way or another is it comes back to bite in the ass, so to speak, in this case. And the other thing that, not that it's quite the same, but I've seen makeups, particularly with generic makeups, where if it's not glued on properly, when they exhale, you'll see the face inflate slightly, like the air gets to, and it looks
like a frog.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So again, if that's a choice, then that's a good thing if you wanted that. But if you weren't expecting it, especially if someone's panting, they're running and they're breathing fast, you can kind of see the nose kind of flapping in and out rapidly with each breath. That's an unintended consequence, as in like overly wobbly ears or whatever. But we're expanding the brief far too much there. But it was a very good thread, and I just wanted to bring that up because it is something that isn't sculpturally you might be aware of until you come to deal with an actor that's upset with you. So it's good to build that into your job and make sure you think about these things early doors. So on to our episode this time. Maddie Scott-Spencer, who we spoke to last year in a flat, and It was an awesome chat. I listened to it again this weekend.
Yeah, I listened to it during the week also. It's
fucking brilliant.
So much good information in there.
It is. And I think what I was thinking about why I like Maddie's style so much. And I mean, her videos are really the first videos I saw that didn't just assume that you knew a bunch of stuff. A lot of really good tutorials out there, but they rattle very quickly through things. They use the correct terminology, but it's like the person showing the video has forgotten that the person watching this for the first time doesn't already know this terminology. And Maddie doesn't do that. She feeds you through very gradually, very slowly. And there's no sort of egotistical flashiness, even though the finished result is amazing. And she's really good at
No, she's a very good teacher.
Yeah, she's very good. So I would recommend, if you're interested in ZBrush, learning ZBrush, check out Maddie's. We'll put links in the thing, but check out her tutorials. She's got some free videos on YouTube too. They're well worth looking at.
It's 65 videos. It's the Gnomon School online, our introduction to ZBrush. And I think it's ZBrush 2020, but it's even if you're currently up to date with ZBrush, it's going to be the same. ZBrush hasn't changed enough for any of it to matter. And just the first 3 videos in this introductory series of 65 videos will change your world in terms of feeling comfortable with ZBrush. It's not as daunting as you might think. And she says so repeatedly.
Yeah, I mean, we did specifically ask her about beginners because I was keenly aware that this is, well, 2 things. One is that I didn't want people to feel that this was straying too far from our original brief of being a prosthetics podcast. And secondly, that it would get too involved in itself with the technical side of things. But in this, we do talk about what would a beginner do. And one of the things, obviously, is the cost of buying a full-fledged copy of ZBrush. The ZBrush Core Mini and ZBrush Core, I think ZBrush Core Mini is still free, I think. It's not a fully fledged, it's not as many bells and whistles, obviously, but it will get you up and running and starting. And if you don't want to get that, and you do have an iPad or an Android tablet, Nomad Sculpt is an app. I think it's £15 or thereabouts, and it's pretty damn good. And it's a very, very good way of starting to get into the digital headspace. But what we touched on this in the podcast, is why I think it's so important is because previously, when people sculpted digitally, it was only to output as a model in a film we'd see its image. With the advent of affordable sort of desktop printing, you can now output things physically. So people like me can use digital means in the real world. And in the last couple of years over lockdown, I've had quite a few jobs with the medical world where I've been doing exactly that. And it's amazing. So it's incredibly relevant to be able to use ZBrush in a prosthetic context, especially when you're dealing with scanning. You know, even if it's just printing cores, which you then mold. But the point is, you can do a lot of stuff with it digitally, which if you can just open up ZBrush and use it just like any other tool, because that's all it is. It opens up. It's like finding a new floor in your house, not just another room, but a whole floor you didn't know was there. You know, and it doesn't mean the other rooms go away. These are in addition to what you have.
Well, in our episode with which another one that hasn't aired yet with Ian Morrill and Mike Hill and Norman Cabrera, Mike does not believe that digital sculpting is actual sculpting. You know, that comment aside, ZBrush and 3D scanning and 3D printing has become part of makeup effects.
Well, enough people are using it.
It is here and it's not going anywhere.
Yeah. But the thing is, as we say in this podcast as well, you don't have to do one or the other. It's just another set of tools that you use. And one of the things I think you point out, which is a really good one, is, you know, you could digitally burn through a bunch of designs just to get the client to say yay or nay. And then when you've locked it down to 1 or 2, then you take those models and then you sculpt them for real.
Yeah.
Or something that I'm looking to do. You remember we were talking about the hand puppet things I was going to do.
Yep.
I've got, this is a really good example of how we can use them together. So I had Richard Martin scan my hand, you know, in a kind of puppeteering position,
right,
my whole forearm. And I basically took that model, cleaned it up, flipped it, and made a left and a right in one hand. So it's basically just wide here. So it would fit either a left or right hand. And I printed that and I've molded it. I'm going to do the paw tomorrow in silicon. I've done the jacket and everything. I'm going to make a mold of that and then my plan is to sculpt up digitally the puppet. I think you're going to be kind of like a Frankenstein. But I think it would look good.
Like the stickers we made.
Like the stickers you designed. Yeah. Which means I've got to do some hair work if I'm going to go with a werewolf, but the beard thing kind of works. But I was going to sculpt it in ZBrush on the same course, so I know the mold of it would fit. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use extract to reduce it evenly all over.
Tell you what, I'll send you the scan file of your head, the one that I did for Jan's stew.
Okay, thank
with
you.
Your beard, and then you can just turn that into a werewolf.
Okay, yeah, no, why not? Yeah, absolutely. And your head as well. I think you may have sent me your head, but yeah, we'll work with that. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to print it as a core, because the thing is, if I mold it on that, it will fit the original core that I've already printed because it's the same model, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sculpt as a test. I'm going to sculpt up the Frankenstein U on it on my arm. Then I'm going to extract it smaller. So the whole thing's going to be like 3 mil smaller, evenly all over. I'm going to print that. And then I'm going to sculpt the remaining 3 mil. Basically, the blocking out is done digitally. And then I will do the texturing, the surface with plastiline, just to see how it looks. I'll probably end up flocking it anyway, so you won't see any of that. But my point is I want to try and see how it feels, because that's a really good use of the material. You can actually get something that's slightly smaller all over. So you've done the legwork, the heavy lifting done digitally, and then the finish is plastiline. So you have all that detail and see. I'm sure it could be just all digital and printed, but the plan is to do that on one, and on the other one, I might sculpt it digitally and then just print the molds and see how it goes. So giving myself these little jobs, extra little things.
You have options.
So I have options, and I'm going to try all the things I would try in jobs on this, my own little job. And I have jobs coming in. I mean, I'm busy for the rest of the year, but by putting these little things in when I can, it just means I'm going to try things using ZBrush, incorporating ZBrush into my workflow. I'll find out what works, what doesn't work. I'm fully prepared to waste my time trying it. And then if it doesn't work, I know it doesn't work. And then, at some point I'll be asked to do something. I'll be like, oh, I can use this method there. And it's just trying to use what ZBrush is in my world. And there are all kinds of worlds out there, model making and all kinds of medical stuff that are just using ZBrush for different things, not just prosthetic-y stuff. So it's very, very exciting. But at the same time, I'm also sculpting pieces, things are happening and I'm sculpting with plastiline on the cores. So I don't see why you have to do one or the other. I think it's good to do both.
Absolutely.
Nice. And I remember not knowing how to do any of this, but I'm hoping that listening to Maddie will make you, as a listener, go, oh, I will try it. Because the beautiful thing is as well, she comes from a background of practical world. She worked with her hands making pieces and making models, and that never went away. And she even says about how much she hated ZBrush and was hoping that, hating digital and hoping that Y2K would just wipe out all computers, so she didn't have to learn it.
Yeah, but she still loves pushing clay around.
Yeah, well, you don't have to do one or the other. That's the thing. You can do both. But she's a great sculptor and she's a great teacher, and we had a great time talking to her. So I guess I'll stop talking now and let Maddie do her thing.
And I keep going back to them, and just because they're so thorough, I think, okay, I've got this down, and it'll be maybe a couple of weeks before I can try something again. And I get, it's working. What was I supposed to do here? What? And I go back and look at the video again, and duh, and bam, off I go, like to the races again.
That's great. I love hearing that. I've been teaching actually classes at Gnomon since 2006, in addition to doing the videos. And I always tell all of my classes that I think the thing that I'm most proud of out of every movie, everything I've been involved in, is just the classes that I've taught since 2006. All the different students, all the artists I've been able to share information with, and everybody who's read the books or seen the videos, because you don't really know a thing until you can communicate it, like really know it. And I love sharing the information. It's that Dick Smith tradition.
Absolutely. If you want to know how to do something, all you got to do is ask.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a certain amount of pleasure in that, because I know what it's like when you sculpt for clients or something. They're not, they're finding the holes in it because they're paying for it. But people who want to learn something, it's a completely different experience.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's quite refreshing, actually.
Yeah, definitely.
I'll turn my mic up a touch.
When you're not on a deadline to get something finished, and it's got to be this way and it's got to be that. when you have the time and the freedom to go in and make stupid mistakes and fuck things up and go back and fix it. You know, the lovely thing about it being a software, you can't really break it.
Yeah.
So, you know, you can just go back, and I love that you have all of these undos, and you can see different iterations of things, and with layers, being able to dial that in. We've been talking this week about, you know, bridging the digital and the practical world, and how you could sculpt several different ideas for a makeup using layers to get production to sign off on, and then lock that in, and you've got your reference if you need to do a practical sculpt of it, or you can go ahead and print that. You can do extract and Boolean subtract and all that stuff to get your positive and your negative, and literally print the mold for your piece right there. And with printing costs coming down,
is that a newish? I mean, obviously you've been designing and working digitally for a while, but is it fair to say it's a new thing to have these things now turned out practically, whereas before they would have just been on the screen as an image?
Yeah, I mean, having access to affordable 3D printing, like desktop 3D printing, is relatively new. I mean, when I first moved to Los Angeles and was working at Gentle Giant Studios, the quality of printer that would fill up a room is now on my kitchen table, and that's amazing. And that's put the tools in so many people's hands. You know, there were people that were thinking about it back in the early 2000s. How can I use 3D printing to facilitate practical makeup effects or practical creature effects approach? But it was only in the hands of people who really could afford the tools, and so many people can now. That it's wonderful, and there's so many people exploring it and doing really cool things with it. So yeah, it's definitely new, and the fact that it's the democratization of the spread of that technology.
Are any of the things that you are working on or have worked on in the recent past being translated into practical pieces, or is it still pretty much a digital realm for you?
In the recent past, not so much. I did a couple things where I was picking up some stuff and then doing design work that would be done practically, but it's been a long time. Most of what I do now, it's designed digitally and then realized digitally. And I would love to do more that's being realized as an animatronic or a makeup, but it's just the shows that I'm working on tends to be from ZBrush and Photoshop into Maya and the pipeline. Do
you still work physically? I mean, I know you studied in Florence.
Yeah, I love, as you see, I'm in a bit of a small Linden flat, so I make the space I can to do the sculpting. I recently started sculpting in wax again, doing lost wax casting, and looking at doing ZBrush for that as well, because lots of folks are doing amazing stuff with ZBrush and 3D printing for jewelry. But yeah, I do try and always, I'm just not happy unless I'm sort of touching and holding form and moving things around. So
that was my big thing in making my switch from visual effects animation to practical makeup effects. Is I've always been a tactile person, and I love being able to hold what I'm working on. And now with the digital world and printing it, you can get the best of both worlds.
Yeah.
It's really good to hear you saying about the practical, because it doesn't have to be mutually exclusive. It's you can still sculpt manually. It's not like one replaces the other. You want to.
Yeah, and you can so easily make a quick mold and pour monster clay in it or wax in it, and then have an object that you can work into with your sculpting tools that started out in ZBrush. And again, back to the fact that it's not that expensive of a process anymore. It's feasible to bounce back and forth between the two.
What advice would you offer to someone who has been working practically and maybe trepidatious about bridging that gap over to the digital world?
Well, if they're looking at ZBrush for digital sculpting, and what I always say is that the learning curve looks far more steep than it is. It doesn't look like other programs. If you're familiar with any other 3D programs, if you've never touched 3D before, you might be just trepidatious about the idea of working in 3D. But everything that matters, you already know. You know about form, you know about sculpting, you know about the play of light across the surface. That's all the important stuff. it's very easy to learn where to press the buttons, what buttons to press, and how to navigate the program. And it's much faster to learn that than you think when you're first looking at it. And once you get over that initial learning curve, there's this dump of everything that you already know, that your muscle memory knows, your hands know, your eyes can recognize. It goes right into the program, and you're able to do the same work. But you can do it, at your desk at 3 o'clock in the morning without having to pick up little bits of Roma plastilina out of the carpet. So,
been there.
Yeah,
it's my childhood.
So yeah, I mean, anybody that's thinking about making that leap, absolutely make it, because you're just going to open up a whole new tool set, a whole new world for yourself. And it doesn't mean also that, you have to leave clay. I mean, I remember, you remember Y2K? You remember the Y2K scare? I remember like right before year 2000, I was sitting in my room watching Blade and admiring the designs on Blade, and I was thinking, man, I really hope that Y2K knocks out all the computers so I don't have to learn digital. Which is kind of a short-sighted, also, end of the world, but none of that happened, and I said, okay, fine, I'll pick up digital. And really, I would have dropped it had ZBrush not come out, because ZBrush was the first thing that let me take what I expected sculpting to be and apply it in the computer. Because when I first came to 3D modeling, I would say, all right, well, how do I make a creature bust? And they'd be like, oh, you move points around in space. I was like, okay, I can kind of get with that. And then I was like, well, how do I put details and wrinkles on it? And they're like, oh, well, you paint a map for that, a bump map. I'm like, what? This is stupid. I'm not going to do this. And so I was about to change my major, and I saw ZBrush 1.5B. And
this was at SCAD?
Yeah, this is at SCAD, Savannah College of Art and Design.
Were you at the Atlanta campus, or were you in Savannah?
Savannah. There was no Atlanta campus then. Yeah, that was 2002, I think. 2002. And dove into it, and I was like, yes, this is it. This is this immediate tactile kind of feeling of sculpting. If I want a form, I just make the form. And I think I was really lucky that I had the background in sculpting to inform what I was trying to do with the Wacom tablet. It wasn't even a Cintiq yet.
Do you remember any of the forced feedback tools?
Yeah, I used those at Gentle Giant, the
haptic
freeform, I think it was. Yeah, everybody who used that ended up with repetitive stress injury in their shoulder, because you're sitting there holding that little arm, and it was funny because to me it always felt like a bit of a gimmick. It's like, I know that I'm not touching the thing, and touch, it turned out, wasn't really what I respond to when I'm sculpting. It's seeing the light and the shadow and the midtone.
I think that's probably true for most sculptors. I remember trying it at a SIGGRAPH one year and think, I don't really like this very much.
Yeah.
Probably very delicate as well, I should think.
Well, it still felt kind of prototypey, that it wasn't really there.
Mm-hmm.
It was neat because it had this voxel-based technology that allowed you to cut in negative space in something the way you would in clay. That was really nice, and there's still kind of an extra step in most programs to just punch a hole in something that you wouldn't really have in freeform. You could just punch a hole right through it, or in voxels, or that was nice. But there's so many things that it didn't do well at the time. I'm interested to see if it comes back around, because I was just saying the other day, like, I remember metaballs and voxels and that stuff.
Lightwave kind of helped pioneer some of that stuff.
Yeah, and it has a lot of potential, but it never really came back around. I think 3D Coat does some stuff with it. But it was one of those things, just being able to just scoop and carve and blob things on was really interesting. And I think that some of the VR sculpting tools are similar. I played with those. Have you done any of the VR sculpting yet?
No.
I've heard of Medium, and that seems, there's a few people I know in, like Lars Carlson's been doing that in Sweden.
Yeah, and Frank Ippolito was using the Oculus.
Yeah.
And I think Rod Maxwell has been doing it also. And I remember him talking about walking around a sculpture and being able to climb up into a nostril and walk around inside the nose. It seems a little extreme, but
I'd like to try it.
Kind of interesting.
Yeah. Can we talk about your sort of background in sculpting? Like, what drew you? Were you surrounded by sculpture and stuff as a kid, or was it something you started becoming interested completely independently of?
I just wanted to make monsters, and I was reading Fangoria, and gosh, let me see, where did it start? I mean, I've always loved monsters. Always. I cannot think of a time that I didn't just absolutely love monsters. I want to hang out with monsters and have monster friends coming over at night and I just,
I'm so sorry about Halloween over here. It's just a drag compared, isn't it?
It's funny. It's funny that way. It's better than it was in New Zealand because Halloween falls in the spring in New Zealand, which is just you're trying to get in the mood, but it's spring. It's very strange. But I love like the whole just monsters. I love monsters, and then I remember I got Fangoria, and I think I was getting maybe like the last issues of Famous Monsters of Filmland, and Tom Savini's book Grand Illusions, and just got really cheap modeling clay in my parents' basement and started trying to sculpt, and I just making little busts and making little heads and stuff, and then like getting into more advanced ideas. Like I remember there were these 2 videotapes. One of them was it was a book. It was a tape on prosthetics that was sold in Fangoria. It was It was
Dan Didrik.
Dan Didrik, yes, Dan Didrik.
Yeah, I remember that because we looked at the Michael Burnett ones.
Yeah,
when we went to your house. Yeah, that's it. Gross teeth effects and all that. And
I love the Michael Burnett ones too. Yeah. Oh my God, I made that gut effect that he did to make. I bought his whole set and I made the gut effect. And we made a little video. We made a horror movie at my friend's house one weekend. But I remember I learned how to do life casts from that. My mom drove me up to the dental supply house a couple miles from my house, and they were really just charmed by this little kid coming in buying alginate, and I bought alginate, took it home, and my mom let me do a cast of her head, and I made a severed head of my mom, which she was so proud of. And I just went from there, and I think there was Carl Zundel did Halloween mask making one, so I learned how to do a 2-part plaster mold from that, because there just wasn't the wealth of information so easily accessible then that there is now.
Yeah, Gaurzone was amazing as well. Do you remember the FX Lab tutorials with Kathy and Drexler?
The Lee Bagan's book was a big one for me getting going.
I've got a video on my phone right now from the last time I was visiting my parents' house where I found the rubber tubing cable control hand that I made from the Gaurzone tutorial.
Oh my
still
gosh.
in my parents' basement. It was so funny.
That's awesome. Yeah, they had some great tutorials. I remember the plaster tutorial about stacking the plaster. They time it so you mix up ultra cal and then so you master it, and it was just little things like that. You don't see too much of that now. A lot of it's
we were just up in Bolton last week or early.
It was last Monday, Tuesday.
Yeah, last Monday and Tuesday, and there were these little plaster towers all along the back wall in one of the effects classrooms where they'd been doing the little plaster thing.
Yeah. That was so cool. That was Kaelin and Drexler because they did a lot of their labs. Because I remember the Dick Tracy book by Mike Bonifer, and I've still got it. And the one with the brow. I remember seeing the brow makeup, and you could see where it had been blended into the skin, and it hadn't been coloured, but they powdered it. But you could already see that just a lick of colour on that was going to blend in. And you were like, that was that moment where it was still fake, but you could see it was going to work. And it was always like, how do you get to that point? And like you, I didn't know anybody that did it, so it was just in books for me. And a lot of it was in English. I'm in England, so we had different materials and different material names and things, which is why I think this is so much fun for us, because I'll say something, the equivalent of that is this, and people listening to the States will know what I'm talking about because you know what I mean. And it's mad how that works. So did you have any friends that were into it, or were you just like, this kind of frustrated, like trying to do things?
It was pretty much just me. I mean, I had other friends that read Fangoria and would kind of tinker with it, but none of them were sort of just myopic about it as me and obsessed with it and just trying to do more and more. And,
did you try the makeup route, or was sculpting kind of always
sculpting was
in your
what
future?
I really, really loved doing, and I would, I did, I learned sculpting prosthetics and worked on, I remember making my own gelatin prosthetics at home, and started working for a makeup effects artist in Atlanta, Bill Splatt Johnson, who's still working in Atlanta, really, really great. He was huge influence on me. Because I remember it was like my 20th birthday, I think, and I had his business card since I was 15. I had gone up to this, it's Atlanta Costume, I think, that had a makeup counter, and I would buy supplies there. And they gave me his card, like, don't tell him we gave you this card, but you should call this guy. And I was just too shy until like 5 years later, and I called and said, can I come clean out your studio for free or something? And he's said, I'm busy, call me back tomorrow. So I called back the next day, and he's like, you don't ever do this, but I need some help right now, so come on out. And it became a friendship, and I worked on a lot of stuff for him and did sculpting on 8-legged freaks, and mainly sculpting dead spiders and stuff like that, and did some prosthetics in theater and film in Atlanta for a bit before I went and decided, well, I'm going to go to art school, and then I ended up picking up ZBrush. So,
Bill's been good about mentoring young up-and-comers.
Yeah, I was the first. He was like, "I'll never do this," and then I guess I didn't. I did mess it up, so I'm really,
Yeah, well, you
really
set a
glad.
precedent because he's still doing it.
So where did you go from there? So you discovered ZBrush. Did someone show you that, or did you stumble across it somehow, or was it something that someone was saying, "Oh, you have to check this out"?
At the time, I remember there was a couple scripts that had been written for Maya where people would do difference maps between a high resolution mesh and a low resolution mesh. And I remember seeing that around the same time as seeing the first images that had been done by the beta testers for 1.5b, who were all working on, I think, the Two Towers at the time, the Lord of the Rings film. And just seeing it, I was like, oh my God, that's amazing. And I was like, I get what this is. So we're extracting a displacement map so you can actually render what you're sculpting. So if you've got 2 million polygons, you can still actually use it. I was like, this is incredible. I've got to get this. And I got a Wacom tablet and I pre-purchased it. I think the 1.5b, I think I purchased it, and then it was released, and then I was able to download it. And I've actually still got the CD in the other room that they mailed me for my first ZBrush. So I've got the CD-ROM. I just found it the other day in storage. And yeah, it was I'd seen it around online, and it was the answer. It was what, I was saying before, that 3D just didn't feel like anything like sculpting or anything that I enjoyed about it.
Had you modeled in Max or Maya before that?
Yeah, I'd been playing with 3D Studio Max 2.5, I think, and Maya 1.0. I'd been tinkering with it, but again, it was like, it was either lofting splines or NURBS, or it just, none of it had that brushed-based immediacy. It was beneficial to learn like box modeling, but still there was that big leap between getting, an edge looped head and getting sort of the gravity in the folds and getting all that stuff that you can't quite get if you're just sort of moving points around with no brush based interface. So I've done a little bit of it, but none of it really stuck with me.
So for listeners who have no idea what Maddie just said, if that was like Swahili to you, We'll put a little glossary in the show notes to kind of explain what this stuff means and how it translates into a sculpture you can recognize and feel.
It's all of those methodologies are pretty antiquated at this point. If you are a good sculptor and you can sculpt in ZBrush and create a nice form, a really resolved sculpture, using all the things that you already know, in terms of, gravity and weight and balance, then it's a very tiny thing to either learn how to build a model on top of that to then use in a 3D pipeline, or it's very often somebody specializes in that and they can do that part. That, there's a difference between being a very, very, very good sculptor and being a very adept sort of pipeline modeler. And they're often they overlap, but they don't have to. So don't ever find yourself going, oh gosh, I don't know what polygon modeling is. I don't know what this is. I don't know what that is. Just get into ZBrush and get to sculpting. Get comfortable with translating your sculptural knowledge into digital, and then the rest of that will fall into place much faster than you might ever think.
That's great advice.
Yeah, it's coming at it, like you say, from that sculpture point of view. It's just a tool, because it doesn't sculpt for you. It certainly makes things easier, like having had to weld up armatures and order tons of clay and dispose of the things and make molds. What we've said this before, it's like what you find out is what you don't know anatomically very quickly. Yeah. So it feels like the program, but it's not. It's actually an absence of information.
Yeah, if you don't understand primary and secondary form, ZBrush is not going to make the process any easier for you.
Yeah, exactly. Like every term, there's students come in and they're dividing the mesh up really high and adding all this detail. It's like, no, you can go through all 10 weeks of this class, and if you never put a wrinkle or a pore on anything, I'll be happy, because it's all that detail and all that those little fiddly bits are not going to make something that doesn't have good gesture and good form look good. Think it's like all the, think of Michelangelo's David or Donatello's David. There's no detail on that. That's all pure form. And if you do a really good form, you're 99% of the way there. You can put, I don't ever want to sell short the importance of understanding how skin wrinkles or how pores are shaped, but I feel like for someone like who's just learning how to sculpt, they can come to it and just not worry about that part and just worry about the way the forms wedge together, and like you said, primary and secondary form.
Yeah, well, that's what I think ZBrush does very well. Is you're kind of forced to think about, because you can have such a low resolution thing that you can only look at the form. And I think especially when people are starting out, because they see the surface first, they're distracted by the surface, and it's kind of like what I've done with prosthetic sculpting is blur images of older faces, so you can't see the form, so you're not distracted by it.
Yeah.
So you're focused on the form, which is nice because you can pull those things around. Have you got if so someone's listening to this and go, I fancy trying sculpting, how would you would you be so kind as to give us what would you say, like, this is what you should do first? Like, I don't know, sculpt a self-portrait ahead, or draw some clay, or get some Nomad going on an iPad or something, or all of that.
I think, I would grab the ZBrush trial. There's a trial ZBrush version now. You can get that.
How do you feel about the core and the ZBrush Core Mini and all that kind of stuff, the lower ones as well? Do you think, have you ever looked at those?
Yeah, I've played with those, and those are great. Those are wonderful introductions. ZBrush Core is great if you just want to sort of like dip your toes in and get a feel for it. But there is the trial version, which you can try the full version, which will give you enough time to work through some tutorials. And I always tell people, check out either my Gnomon workshop tutorials or anything on the Pixelogic website in their Z Classroom. Learn how to grab a sphere and start sculpting a head of a sphere, and just do lots of sphere sketches. And I think don't get stuck in trying to perfect one thing for too long. I would work on it for like a day or a few hours, throw it away, do another one. Just do a whole bunch of them, and you're going to very quickly start to get a feel for what the brushes do, how they react to the surface, and how you can move things around. And there's this tool in there called Dynamesh that you'll come across. And Dynamesh makes it really, really easy to sort of pull things out, make volumes, and start sculpting stuff around. But what you're going to find is at a certain point, and Dynamesh it doesn't give you that ability to step up and down subdivision levels. So seeing things in their more simplified form can be, this is probably too much information for somebody just starting, but
no, it's good.
Don't get stuck in making the model more and more dense. Just think about like the big shapes, think about how those shapes wedge and how those forms wedge into one another and how they relate to one another. Just try and get that subtlety of touch, because it's all about dialing back the brush intensity, relaxing, and building things up. I call it sneaking up on shapes, just building them up bit by bit, and then stop, open a new sphere, do another one, repeat. And then you will be doing really well, much faster than you might expect. Just don't become overwhelmed by how many options there are, because most of the stuff in the program you can never touch and it'll never miss.
All right. Saying that, with so many brushes at your disposal, are there, 3 or 4 brushes that you think are essential that will be the ones to work with initially, and don't worry about the others yet? Yeah,
I've always said that everyone has 5 brushes, and it's just like sculpting tools. Like in my sculpting kit, I've got probably hundreds and hundreds of dollars worth of sculpting tools, and 5 that I would ever actually use. And brushes, like paint brushes, painters the same way. And with ZBrush, there's usually 5 brushes. And for me, it's always Move, Standard, Inflate, Clay Tubes, and Dam Standard. And I do 90% of everything I do with those 5 brushes. But if you open the brush menu in ZBrush, you'll see this massive palette of brushes. It's overwhelming. It's option paralysis. You have no idea what to do. I start every class with just these 5 brushes. You can use these 5 brushes for the rest of this term, and you can do anything that I do in the demonstrations, because you just don't need all these specialized tools to get most of the stuff that you want to get across. And if you kind of adopt too many, if you try and dive into every single brush at the beginning, you're going to spin your wheels and just be like, what about this brush? What about this? Do I need to use this one? And that's just a waste of time. Those 5 brushes are all you really need. And everybody's probably got a little variant on theirs, and once people become accustomed to it, they'll find maybe their own 5 that they like, because they'll start to branch out and explore what this brush or that brush might do. But yeah.
I think that sneaking up on thing is awesome.
Yeah.
I really like that, because there's a certain anxiety, certainly with prosthetic sculpting, where you kind of want to, I don't know, as you get more experience, you want to get it on quickly so you can see what it is and then start relaxing, because most of it's there. And I'm the opposite with ZBrush. I'm very nervous, so I'm sneaking up on it because I'm nervous of finding out what I can't do. He sneaks up on it
and then he yells at it.
And I yell at it. Why isn't this like clay?
Yeah.
but I will get there, I promise.
I always take the clay tubes brush and ZBrush and turn the alpha off because it builds up form in this really, and turn down the Z intensity, and it builds up form in this very soft fall off. That's not, it's not like an airbrush. It's still got an edge, discernible edge to it, but it lets me sort of build things up and then knock it back a little bit, build it up, and then I get that chaos of repeating and building things up bit by bit, knocking them back and building them up.
So it's more like actually adding little bits of clay,
Mm-hmm.
which, you don't want to throw in large chunks. You want to do little bits at a time, as Neil calls them, little sausages of clay. Sorry, Neil. I'm not a very good impersonator.
At Florence Academy of Art, we did everything with balls of clay. You'd start with big balls, put down big balls of clay, and then smaller and smaller until you were putting down smaller and smaller balls of clay, that when you step back, it had that effect where the surface blurred together and you had a refined surface without smoothing it. This is another thing. People can over-smooth. Don't over-smooth your sculpture. Like something that I do that, I tell them in my classes, I'm like, this is kind of an advanced thing. Don't try and do this right out of the gate. But I don't smooth my meshes. For a long time, I use planer brushes, and I knock back big planes and then smaller planes and smaller planes, and I get a curved form by knocking down smaller and smaller planes to it, like we would if we were raking clay.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just one of those things. It's like, how to do it in clay if you've got your rakes and you're thinking about the planar analysis of the shape. But then you get into ZBrush and it's very easy to miss, because you don't necessarily have a rake that is like the one that you're accustomed to using. So you might be like, oh, how do I get that thing? And you just forget it, and everything looks smooth. And that's a really important thing, I think, is to not over smooth your surface and not lose your form and make it just blobby and soft.
How long were you in Florence?
I was just there for like 3 months. 2 months. I was going to do the full program, but I just graduated from uni, and I was like, I really want to stay here and do this, but I also had the opportunity to go to California and get back into the film industry, so I decided to do that. It's one of those branching moments in your career. You could have gone one way or another. It could have been sort of, overstaying a visa and hiding out in an art academy like the other Americans at the school.
Can we talk a bit about when you're sculpting? Obviously, when you're sculpting for a job, for a show, you will have a brief, presumably, and it's there are parameters you work within. Because I think that's quite important, is it, to have a brief? Mm-hmm. How do you find working with a brief? Obviously, you've got a lot of latitude within that. Is it creative, or do you like to have more choice, or do you find that no matter how tight a brief can make it? I think tight briefs are quite hard to come by. Normally, most people don't really know what they want, do they?
Yeah, the joke is always like when you get to that page in the script, they're like, and then the monster turns the corner, and it's like nothing you've ever seen before. And then
so
slowly,
how do you get that out of them?
Well, then slowly over the next few months, it becomes exactly like something you've seen before as you get more and more notes back. It's like, wait, this is just Predator with tentacles. So yeah, it's always based on a relationship. And it varies from show to show and client to client. Some my favorites are the ones where I can really get in and talk to the client about the brief, if there's an open brief or a loose brief, or if they're not quite sure, and I can share why I think this particular thing works, why this particular idea works, why this is a better way to go, not to fall back on this cliche, but maybe subvert expectations, or to to make something unique and put it on screen. And it's really great when you can have that great relationship where there's this back and forth, and they trust you as a designer to, who's been thinking about monsters for, decades, to bring them something really unique. And then, but you can't be married to anything that you come up with in this industry. It will change. Sometimes it changes because there's multiple people involved in it that have different ideas. It could come because somebody's genuinely worried, like, oh, maybe this is too much. Maybe I should change it. Or maybe they just have a different idea about what they want. You can't take it to heart and think, oh God, I failed, But it's really great when you have a really wonderful back and forth, and you can take that brief and turn it into something really, really quite cool.
Mm. I'm wondering if there's a literacy to working with designs and things, that obviously some clients are better at it than others. I know Don Lanning was saying about how he's very good at, it's their job. They're the one. Yeah. Everyone's having a good old row outside.
He helps pull the ideas out of them that they that are inside them that they don't know they have yet.
Yeah, and I think it speaks to your experience that you're not eager to get that stuff. You want to fulfill them so they're happy rather than inflict on them what you insist on doing, kind of thing.
Yeah,
that's not going to work very well otherwise.
No, not at all. I mean, it's great when you can. When someone says, "I want something like I've never seen before," and I always tell the artists on my team, it's like it's always better for somebody to say, "Wow, can you pull back from that?" Than "Can you push that further?" Because I think you should really just kind of overwhelm the senses with, "Oh my gosh, that's really out there. That's really wild. That's really cool." Maybe you should pull them back from that, or if you're lucky, they say, "Let's go with that. That's really neat." And but if you have to ultimately, we're a commercial artist that's hired to do a job, so you have to do what the client is asking for, and if they have an idea about something that you don't think is the best, that's not really your place. You can try and steer them away from a mistake, and like I said, that comes with the relationships that are quite communicative. It's really good to be able to say, well, that potentially will be a problem because of this, or I don't think that's going to read really well in this scene, or this is not going to be as effective as this. If you can be literate and make your case, with clear visual language, these are visual people, then usually it's well received. But if you just go in there, that's not what I want to do, that's, sorry.
Yeah, I think that's a very important thing, like you say, to be able to communicate your reasons for something very clearly so that they know why.
Well, that's also something that we've been talking about through this last series of podcasts since I've been here is, as artists, what's the difference between being a fine artist and a commercial artist? Sometimes those lines are blurred, but as a commercial artist, when you're hired, you're a hired gun. You're doing something, creating something that is not your idea. And as artists, it's pretty difficult sometimes to separate yourself from that. You're putting part of yourself into that, even though it's not your work ultimately.
Yeah.
And hard to have a thick skin and take those constructive criticisms, saying, so that's not what I want. Do this instead. Go that direction instead of this direction. And to do that objectively and not take it personally.
And to have the wherewithal to understand, if you have a client who's telling you that's not what I want, they have a clear vision, and that's a blessing. You should be really happy that they've got a clear idea of exactly either what they want or what they don't want. And it's not, you're not just spinning your wheels against, oh no, not that, maybe something else. I mean, that's valuable.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because like you say, it's your skill as a sculptor is to supply them what they need. So it's not just about you being good at sculpting, it's about doing it in a commercial environment, and a big part of that is listening to your client, reading between the lines.
Yeah,
communication is critical, because sometimes they don't know what they want. They know what they don't want, but they I don't want that. I'm not sure what I do want, and trying to it's one of those smacking your head against the wall, but you have to maintain.
That's where sometimes it's really good if you can, a big part of all of this is as being this role of an artist and designer is having a visual vocabulary, and being, having the confidence to speak from that experience and from that visual vocabulary. And someone says, that's not what I want. I know that that's not what I want. We'll say, well, then put together a mood board, put together some sketches, put together some ideas, and present them. And don't shy away from don't be afraid to approach the client and talk to the client about it. Say, this is what I think would work, and this is why I think this would work. Does this hit any of the notes that you find appealing? Is there anything in this that you like? And then you can narrow the things down. And I always talk to people about having their visual vocabulary in place, understanding, being able to communicate. Guillermo del Toro was always the most amazing communicator to me. I just remember on The Hobbit, when he was communicating about designs in the design room on The Hobbit, he could say so specifically what he was responding to by referencing Ghastly Graham Ingalls, Joel Peter Witkin, and Jack Kirby in one sentence, and that's so precise and exact, and it's a shared visual vocabulary with a lot of us who come from that, from monsters and creatures and characters. We know exactly what he's talking about for the most part. We know our Ghastly Graham Ingalls, our Bernie Reichsten, in the 20th century contemporary photographer, Joel Peter Witkin, like notorious for shooting these really ghastly images. Just it's so specific, and that left a big impression on me. And going forward, as I've spent more and more time talking to clients in art, in the context of sort of art directing and getting a creature design nailed down, being able to sit back and think to myself, well, interpreting their artistic brief, I think that this particular photographer sort of hits that note, or this particular sculpture. I can't be specific because it's still under NDA, but I did a mood board once for a creature. I was like, well, Bernini has a sculpture that really hits what I think they would be interested in. And there is this contemporary photographer from the 1970s that had this very ghostly style. And I think that would really hit as well. And I put these things together and then make the case for it. Speak to why I chose these things, why I think this is what you want. Because they're also hiring somebody that knows about design. That's what they want. They don't necessarily want to hit you with a riding crop and, force you to do your job. You should make life easier on them.
That's really exciting to hear, because it's that desire, and looking around at all of the things, it's that thing of you're connected and interested in so many things that you pull them into your sculpture. It's not about it doesn't start with ZBrush. ZBrush is just where the things get kind of combined, but you want to have that kind of constantly hungry mind where you're looking, like you say, photography or music or anything. We were listening to Nick Cave on the way up here, and like the Murder Ballads album, some of those would make amazing videos. You were saying short stories, be or just little sections like this. The thing where he says, "My eyes grew small, my eyes grew tight," and I have in my head, I know what that looks like.
Yeah,
I want to see that as a
very
makeup,
visual,
and how you rotate and maybe move the eyes slightly apart, so a bit more predatory, and it's but.
Yeah, and just looking around your flat I can see so many sources of inspiration and ideas, because ultimately ZBrush, as amazing as it is, it's just a tool. It's not.
It's the blinking cursor, isn't it? If you're trying to write a book, it's you can't start with
it's not going to give you the ideas.
Yeah.
It's not gonna fabricate the storyline. It's just a tool that will help you realize a vision in your head from inspirations that you've gotten from Lord knows where, any number of different sources.
Yeah, I think everybody should try and look at, there's wonderful things on ArtStation, and there's wonderful things on Instagram, and I love looking at what others are doing in the industry, but I always think, you should look for inspiration in unusual places. Look at, my favorite art is, the symbolist art movement, which is predates the surrealists, but they dealt a lot with dreams and with mythology, and there's beautiful imagery of these uncanny kind of figures and uncanny creatures, and I'm inspired by that, and inspired by the Renaissance sculptures of I think it's Zampano. He did the plague waxes of these just terrifying plague victims that were done in miniatures and wax, and I find that stuff really inspiring, and there's things that I pull out of that, and it's like, oh, that's really cool. And it's good to be inspired by your peers and what's going on in our industry, but it's also good to expand your visual vocabulary and pull from sources that everyone else isn't pulling from, not just because you want to be different, just because you want to expand, for the same reason you would expand any vocabulary. It facilitates communication. And something I want to mention too about people that are maybe coming from a practical background who want to do ZBrush, please do it, because something that really strikes me is there are people out there with decades of experience thinking about creatures and making sculptures of creatures and characters and monsters, and that is invaluable, and we need that in the world of design that's digital, that's informing a lot of CG and CG effects. We need that type of expertise, because you look at, just it goes back to that visual vocabulary. People that can say, hey, that reminds me a bit of a Botine thing, design for the thing, or that's got a touch of the gargoyles design by Stan Winston, or that's got this or that. There's so much. There's like a plethora of ground that's been covered. And I remember people used to say, it's a little intimidating because like everybody's done an Alien. Can you do a new Alien? It's like you can always put form together in new ways. But people that come from this makeup effects and this practical background, you come from, for lack of a better term, a pedigree. You come from a tradition. You come from a world where people have been thinking about these shapes and making these things and making these compelling creatures for so long. You need to be making that available to the wider industry.
Well, we did a talk with Jake Garber, and one of the points that he made to the room full of, I think mostly students, was that the more you can do, the more you get to do.
Mm.
So that plays right in with that thinking, and it's refreshing to hear everyone we talk to echoing these same things, reinforcing that information.
Yeah.
It's, we do it because we can't not do it. It's part of our nature.
Yeah.
It's in the blood.
Mm-hmm. It's like you're saying about that older stuff as well. It's like a lot of people, I think, get their ideas from existing sculptures, which is cool, or what they see on Instagram. But like, there's so much. I bought some books on medieval art recently because I was really interested in like the Bayeux tapestry and then got into the plague and the depictions of that kind of stuff, because I just like the naive is probably the wrong word, but do you know how there was a kind of a clumsiness to it?
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't necessarily accurate, but it was gone. And they were trying to portray stuff that was happening at the time. And there's this good book called The Sick Rose. I don't know if you've seen it. It's kind of medical illustrations of diseases.
Joanna Epstein, I think, published that.
Yeah,
it's from the Morbid Anatomy Museum in New York, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, there's like 3 or 4 books I think in the series, and and that was that's another example of like trying to use the medium of painting in silk to render a canker in 16th century Japan or whatever. And it's like there's something about that's of that time. There was no cameras or anything, so you had to do, and there was a reason to do it. And so it's
painting
imbued
was
with all
the
this
camera
stuff.
of the day.
Yeah, it's imbued with all this stuff at the time, but you receive it a slightly different way because you're seeing it as this other way, and it just fires off. Like you were saying about people not having bad ideas. You might be uncensored. People censor themselves nowadays, but in a kind of a writer's room, you want to be able to not censor yourself, because even though it might be a crap idea, it might make somebody else come up with something else.
Exactly.
It just kind of feeds.
Yeah, if you hold it back, that brilliant seed never germinates.
Mm-hmm.
So everything is fair game. There's no such thing as a stupid idea.
Yeah, I find that at the beginning, like in the very first sort of deliveries for a concept pass on something, sometimes people can pull their punches or pull things back. It's like, no, let's you don't want to be overwhelming with the amount of art that you send, but hearing what it is not is as valuable as getting an idea of what it is. So like putting a whole like plethora of ideas out there, and don't be afraid to sort of present a wide swath of things and find out, maybe none of these things are right, but now we know that it's not these things and we can change direction.
I'm fascinated by how Maxfield Parrish used light, sunlight in the clouds and reflections and refractions, and maybe you're not into painting clouds, but what he did could easily be coming from within a creature that's got this light coming. The sky's the limit. Excuse the pun, but everything. Everything's fair game.
Yeah, absolutely.
And experience as much as possible.
So you feed your brain with all kinds of things.
Yeah,
and then you're sculpting.
You've got to be. You have to leave yourself open to letting everything in, because it's all going to be valuable, whether you want to be an actor, a writer, a painter, a sculptor. It's all important.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the vocabulary. It's just another.
Exactly.
It's all communication.
And looking at all these books, horror books and ghost stories and stuff. Mm-hmm. I just love all that. Do you know what I love about horror stories and things is, especially with books, there's nothing visual in them. They're all just words, so that the images conjure in your head. So 20 people could read that book and you'd have 20 different versions of what it is that's creepy.
Yeah.
And that's what's lovely about sculpting, because it felt like or drawing, it was a way of like getting that out in a way you could kind of show somebody else.
Yeah.
There was a comic I used to read as a kid. I don't know if you would have seen it. It was an English comic. I have a whole set that I managed to track down on eBay. We were talking earlier about nostalgia and how much that costs with
Right.
the existence of eBay. I tracked down a bunch of Gaurzons that I was after. I found a comic. I need to send you the link as well. I'll send it to you. I managed to get them all on PDF as well. I have the prints. There's only run, I think it was 18 editions long. I think it was 1983 when it came out, called Scream.
Oh,
And it was a British comic, and it was just a horror comic. And it finished around the time there was a printer strike in London. And there was a whole big thing, and I think a load of comics and publications, crashed and fused, and comics kind of went out of fashion a bit. But in it, there were all these different strips, and they didn't pull any punches. I mean, they were terrifying. They were really creepy stories, and there was so many things in there that I'm like, they would make amazing TV shows or little sculptures and things. And that, I remember then, even though I didn't know anything about sculpting, wanting to somehow get it out. I wanted to show other people what it was physically, what it was I didn't like, which is why I think I drifted towards makeup, because to me it was like a minimal sculpting, because I could make a small thing, put it on someone, and the rest of it was there, and it would perform for you, or it'd be on me or something like that. So it's quite gratifying to me to see that you like that kind of stuff. I'm so blown away, honestly. I'm so excited by all the stuff you have. I had no idea it would be this cool.
Oh, thanks.
It's amazing. It's just I want everything in here.
I love having these things. Like, be in a meeting with a client talking about something that's got wings, and I can walk into the other room and bring in, a set of taxidermied wings and say, well, this is, what we're looking for here. You want this and do this, and it's funny. It really can make an impression on someone who's looking to you to realize their brief. If you can walk in the other room and bring in some tangible natural history specimen as reference, like, oh, okay, I'm in good hands. Look what they've got there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and if you're trying to sculpt something that you know what it feels like, and then it's a completely different kettle of fish.
Yeah, even something that you think that you can picture in your head. Like, I always think, use the analogy of if playing the song that's on, for anybody that's musically inclined, you don't play the song in your head, you play what's on the sheet music, because what you think you heard or what you think the song is isn't really what the song is on the sheet music. And it's true with reference too. Like, if you go look at the reference, like the taxidermy chickens there, the feet, you might picture what those look like in your head, but once you really are looking at the reference, you see all these little touches of veracity that you wouldn't think to put in there. I had a mentor in school, Paul Hudson, who's one of the most amazing artists I've ever known. Huge influence on me. He always say, your viewer will know when you're lying. Don't tell lies. Go outside, take some fake blood, mix it up, spatter on the wall. You'll never make up a blood splatter that looks as real as something you just splattered on the wall. Or, drape some fabric, or, look at photo reference, take your own reference, shoot things, and it's, it makes a huge difference. There's things you wouldn't think to put in there if you didn't look at it.
I think that can be the problem with sculpting some things, and it certainly happens with makeup, is that there's an ego involved. Like, you want to produce things, and it takes quite a lot to get past that, so that you let things happen, and perhaps you enable some degree of randomness to take place that you're not entirely responsible for. But if you're like, well, I want it all to be me, and it's like, but sometimes you have to facilitate things rather than be responsible for every single stroke.
Oh God, I love happy accidents. Like, when I draw, I'm just making random marks in my sketchbook and then picking out things I see out of that. And when I'm sculpting in ZBrush, I'll tell people in my demos, I'll make these, I'm sculpting from my arm, not my wrist, and I'm making big gestural shapes and moving around it quickly. And then I'm trying to find accidental forms in the clay, quote clay, in the digital clay, to pull out and say, oh, that's neat. What is that? So I'm discovering it as I go along and seeing things grow out of the clay and seeing it become something new. Like, I always, often I don't really know where something's going. I have a vague idea of what it's going to be, and it's not what it ends up being when I'm finished. I like that adventure of seeing it grow.
I think it's nice when you're doing something for a job, and we were talking about the things you're doing for yourself, like you've done these kind of metal castings and stuff. Something that I've been thinking about this a while, since we were in Portsmouth yesterday. There were a bunch of automaton machines where you put some coins in and a little thing happens, and a few of them were like late Victorian wax delicate figures. And I like the idea of being able to sculpt something and make something that it's a complete thing. Whereas if you sculpt a makeup or you sculpt a creature, unless it's sitting in the context of the movie or the show, it's kind of odd by itself. So there's something quite nice about like this, like an object where it's a standalone thing, it's a finished thing, like you were saying, like something that exists beyond the movie, and I think that's really important. And I get quite excited about the thought of ZBrush landing in the hands of other people that are not necessarily even interested in film. They're just going to do other cool things with it, and where that might go.
Yeah.
Well, I like your idea of just as you're working on something, you have a general idea of what you want it to be, but it kind of takes on a life of its own and it evolves, and you're more of a vessel than the driver.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it.
I don't know what to say. I feel like
I'm just blown away by the whole thing.
Yeah. I feel like words I use with the mouth will just let me down, because it's such a visual thing that we're trying to get across.
We can shoot some photos and include them. So I mean, I believe in like curating a space, and
you've done a magnificent job of it.
Oh, thank you. And I want everything around me to sort of reflect back something that I've wanted my space to be since I was a little kid. Looking at the Addams Family or the Munsters house, and I just everywhere I look, I want there to be something that's inspiring or beautiful or it excites me.
Yeah, it's funny you should mention the Addams Family. I wanted my house to look like that.
Oh, yeah.
I remember when I was like 5 years old, my mom got me this cardboard haunted house playroom off the back of one of the monster cereals, like Count Chocula. And it arrived in the mail, and we put it together, and I just loved it. It was this like cardboard haunted house that was probably maybe the size of this table, because I was tiny. And I remember I was such a weird kid. I'd be like, when she was sweeping up, I'd be like, "Can you put the dust inside of my haunted house?"
It looks authentic.
A little weirdo. Yeah, just such a weirdo.
But there is something weird about models when you see like constructed little sets and things. They're like complete things, and they're lovely. I mean, they're just really, really cool. And I get very excited about that when I see 3D printed things that are like little landscapes and things, because you can create things digitally that don't occupy space whilst you're making them, and then if you want to, you can output them, in a 3D printer and have the object.
It's really neat to see also like your mistakes when you print something out. You recognize when you see it in the real world, like either mistakes that you're making when you're looking at it, or mistakes that you make because of the way the camera tricks your eye in 3D. And I find that really interesting, because I always say that like I didn't get into art to sit back and look at what I did and go, God, I'm really great. I got into it because I wanted that. I'm addicted to that wonderful feeling of, oh gosh, I now know how to do that thing I wanted to do. Like that feeling I got when I first watched like the Dan Didrik video. I was like, so that's how you make a casting. Or I get the flashing to work. It's like, oh, that's how you make an edge on a prosthetic, or that's how you sculpt a zygomatic arch, or that's how you make the pectoralis muscles look correct. And to me, it's this everything I do, I want to look at it. I mean, everything I do, I always say, like, I've only ever liked anything I've ever done for maybe a couple days, and then I just see the mistakes, I see the things that I want to fix. But I don't get down about that. I don't look at it and think, oh, I'm terrible. I look at it and I'm like, yeah, this is what I need to change. This is what I should do better next time. And that's what it really excites me, is each thing is this journey. It's this new chance to do something new. It's not a chance to just like shore up your laurels and say, look how amazing I am.
Those light bulb moments.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's what it's all about. Those aha moments, those light bulb moments that make you feel like, oh yeah, this is why I love this. This is what I wanted to do.
Yeah, well, this is what we have been talking about with students. That it's a journey. It's not a destination. And it's okay to look at your work and think it's pretty good, but there's always something that you can do better.
Yeah.
It's never going to be perfect, and it can't be. And if you look at your work and think, I'm there, that's time to start looking for something else to do, because you're just not trying hard enough.
Exactly. I would say that I would like anatomy as something to study, because you'll never really master it. If you ever meet someone who says they're a master of anatomy, you've also just met an asshole, because it's just an absurd idea. It's like that. It's an endless subject. It's something that goes on. And I mean, the most inspiring and most amazing artists I've ever met are aware of how hard they've worked and aware of how far they've come, but they're always quite aware of how much they don't know. And that's what excites them. And that's left a huge impression on me. And the people that are infinitely confident in their own abilities are tragically unaware of how little they know. And it's sort of, if you're sitting there thinking, God, there's so much I don't know, there's so much I need to learn, well, that's exactly where you should be for the rest of your life. So I wouldn't use that as as anything to sort of beat yourself up with.
So hope this will get you guys into ZBrush if you're not already into it, or at least take a look, because digital is here, folks. It's not going away.
Yeah, and I just want to be able to use it more. I tell you what I want to do with it. I just want to be able to do things with it that help me when I'm making prosthetics. I just don't want to not be able to use those tools because I don't know how. I think that's the thing. It's not about replacing stuff. It's about in addition to,
Yeah.
And especially with the advent of reasonably affordable scanning devices, it's going to make a big difference to be able to take something practical and mess with it digitally, or even receive digital information. One of the things I think is really good. I had this, I think I told you about it it was a show I did last year, and I needed to do I had two. I had to do, what are they called? Bunions. I had to do 2 bunion makeups in the same year. One was on Matt Damon for The Last Duel, and you barely see them. And that was done, on the live casts and done properly with nice edges and everything. And I had another one that was through Connor O'Sullivan. He gave me that nice little job. That was cool. And another one was for, which hasn't come out yet, where a character has bunions, but they're through stocking, so you don't actually see the edges. So they didn't have to be as good, and there was no time to do a live cast. So I bought a foot scan and then basically sculpted the modification very quickly in ZBrush. And then I printed the foot scan and I printed the negative of the foot thing. I basically just ran them in silicone with no cap barrier, just, regular Plat Gel 10. And then you stick them on the feet, and then you put like a sock on over the top so you didn't see the edges, and the color was close, but it didn't have to be flawless. So it was like 2 examples of the same kind of job. One done very, very traditionally with beautiful edges and flawless application by, I think it was Rob O'Connor, and nice thing to do. And then this thing, which had to be done very, very quick in like a day, but the edges didn't matter, and I was able to do that quickly, partly because of the fact that printing, and okay, it took like a day to print everything, but like that was happening while I was doing something else. So
yeah, well, I've been doing the same thing. I've been while I've had this 3L here, another medical case came in where it's for a personal injury, wrongful, criminal negligence thing, where this woman got her head stomped in jail, and printed the full size. The skull was modeled by a medical illustrator in Kentucky. Files were sent to me to print this fractured skull and a hematoma, and it was made like full size, and printed it in the 3L for a jury trial. And the skull was modeled from CT scans, and it looks amazing.
I saw pictures you posted of that, and that's a really good example of something that, because the data's from that person.
Yeah, so you can use ZBrush to create marvelous examples that the jury will be able to hold this horrific injury in their hands and make their judgments.
Yeah.
And on a lighter side, I used ZBrush to sculpt. I'm making a porcelain rabbit doll for a children's theater production that is going to be like a 18-inch tall doll.
Looks awesome.
Yeah,
Looks so cool.
it was so much fun to push and pull points around in ZBrush to make this rabbit.
That's amazing. And that's the thing, is all this stuff is available to you using the same kinds of things, the same devices, the same software, the same tools, same mindset, but in completely different context, and something like that where you're trying to take, I think in your case, it was with this medical thing. It's like, look, the jury don't understand the complexities of how that body works and how this particular thing, affecting her health. And so if you make a model of it, you can physically show someone. And then it's suddenly like, oh, everyone can understand it now. And it's like, exactly. And it's facilitated because of a model. And I think this is one of the really exciting things about ZBrush, actually, is how it's used in illustration, because people will make a model and then use that model to create an illustration. But if you want to see it from a slightly different angle, you can use the same model to create a different illustration. And so the idea that, medical illustrators, that it's not just a drawing, it's a 3-dimensional model to create an image. But
yeah, you don't have to worry about getting your perspective right, because you can just change the angle of the model, and your perspective
Yeah.
has changed. And now
Yeah.
all you have to do is use that as your reference and literally trace it and paint it in Photoshop or Corel Painter or whatever digital paint program you're creating your illustration from. But you've used an actual 3D model to get it positioned correctly for the illustration. And it makes your job so much easier than trying to draw everything in proper perspective from scratch.
Yeah. Well, you could.
And, you know, there will be purists who say, oh, that's cheating. And no, it's not. It's whatever you need to do to get you to the end result.
Well, one of the things I find fascinating is that when you talk to other industries, and like I say, this medical stuff I've been doing, there are, you know, engineers have been using this stuff, like, well, not necessarily ZBrush, but they've been using CAD to design things and look inside things and know that the tolerances are tight and that things will fit inside other things, and hinge joints can be made and accommodations can be made for other things. So you might be making the thing that's going to be plastic, but somebody else can be making the steel thing. Somebody else is going to be making a circuit board, and they all have to fit. So you make these spaces digitally, and you know that they're going to work, or you print up a prototype just to check, and then, you know, all of that stuff. And it's like these industries have been using this stuff for years. It's just not really in the realm of anything organic, because all that stuff was very, you know, hard-edged, machiney, you know, hard edge stuff. Whereas now, because of the processing power of computers and the software, you can do pretty much the same kind of thing, but wobbly skin stuff, you know, and that wasn't something that most sculptors had at their fingertips. So it's there, and it's a weird shift in perception to be able to A, accept it, and B, embrace it and use it. And there are going to be people, like, you know, and I understand it, who don't want to go near it because they think it's a different thing. But I guess you just have to suck it and see, because you might be surprised.
Yeah.
I was just how useful and how intuitive it is once you get past the interface of how it works.
Well, that's one of the cool things about the Space Spider. I mean, it's designed by and for engineers still. You know, it's more and more artists are starting to find it and use it, but it's still geared to engineering, to doing hard surface things like automobiles and engine blocks and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But the level of detail with it, as you saw, is incredible. You know, pore texture and wrinkles, it's perfect.
Yeah, that is amazing.
Flawless.
Yeah, it's very exciting.
But you know, I think next iterations of that scanner will probably have some options that are geared more to the fine artist than the engineer.
Mm-hmm.
I would hope.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, that the more sort of fleshy, organic stuff is becoming more and more within the realm of that. And, you know, the ability to be able to print stuff and prototype stuff is just, it's exciting to see what people are doing with it as well, you know.
Yeah.
If you want to get in touch, feel free to leave us a message on our SpeakPipe app, which is just you go to our website, battleswithbitsofrubber.com, and you'll see a little thing you can just press, and you can just leave us a voice.
Ramble away. You got 5 minutes.
We've got 5 minutes
to leave us an obscure message.
Just it has a time limit so people don't waffle on like me.
Or email us at stuartandtodd@gmail.com.
And we'd love to hear from you. All right, dude. Thank you very much.
I'm back to the writing.
Well, get it done. We need the book. We need to. We need another cool book to keep us informed and up to date, especially with all this extra scanning stuff and printing stuff.
A lot of new stuff.
Put it all into context to make it work.
Major overhaul. I'm reordering chapters. I'm moving stuff around, adding a ton of things, and some of the new contributors are gonna be awesome. All right, man.
All right,
good to see you. Good to talk to you, and do it again soon.
Yes, sir. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
You can get in touch through our Facebook page or email us at stuartandtodd@gmail.com. Check the show notes for more information. If you enjoyed this episode, tell someone else and help us grow by sharing it on social media. Thanks for listening.
Okay, I'll do the makeup.